And what happens though is the culture is such that failure punishes the individual who took the risk. Businesses that move fast, embrace failure, they fail forward, they learn. If your people are scared to try things or try to fail, you're going to move slow.
Welcome to The Training Effect, the show where we uncover how learning systems and operational training drive real business success. I'm your host, Doug Mark, and today we're exploring how to align people, process, and performance through business system strategy with Chris Allen, founder of Venn Springing. Chris helps teams eliminate chaos, build clarity at every level, and today we're going to explore why great systems fail, how to fix them, and how training becomes the engine that powers real execution. Chris, thanks for coming on the pod.
I'm excited to be here, Doug. Good to see you.
It's really great to see you as well. Chris and I have a long history, which I'm sure we're going to get into at some point, but you've been in the trenches with operators, you built your own business, you've built your own systems. Now you help others, create clarity through Venn Springing. What does that really mean? And what's the sort of backstory behind the work that you guys do at Venn Springing?
Without going into too much detail, after I left working with you, I had the opportunity to go work for Accenture, working with their group that does reservation software for airlines. And that was sold off to kind of the mothership of all airline software called Amadeus. And loved it, really enjoyed it. I was director of customer strategy, and I just got really in the trenches with the customers. And one thing about any product, or especially a complex system, is they typically have a lot of customization that is needed, or a lot of additional things that the customer wants it to do. And it was just kind of a gap that we saw. So me and a few of the former senior leadership at the group I was working for, Amadeus, left to form a consulting firm. And we started working with global airlines and their partners and industry vendors to really help them get the most out of their system. That's the genesis of how I got where I am.
Well, and maybe this is a moment for me to kind of pause and step back and sort of introduce Chris from a different angle or different viewpoint. And some of our, clients know this, some of the people who, listen or watch the pod know this, but Chris was really the founder, leader, and visionary at LearningZen, and a big reason why we are successful and where we were able to, I would say, narrow our focus is because of lessons that Chris taught us. And so seeing him go on his journey and keep, building these successful companies is something I think I've long admired. But I think you're really great at taking something that's relatively difficult to explain sometimes and simplifying that. And I know that's sort of what you're doing sometimes in your consulting role, but what kind of operational messes do founders and leaders typically call you in to solve?
Usually typically it's where there is a bottleneck in the delivery chain. So you can look at almost all work as moving information from A to Z, right? And you're trying to do it effectively and clearly. And somewhere in between there becomes stops, and they can be technical problems, they can be process problems, they can even be people problems. And really what we do is we try to bring clarity, and not only do we try to bring clarity, but we try to reduce the amount of stops, whatever that transaction is trying to take between those 2 points.
I keep hearing that word clarity, and I know that operational clarity especially kind of breaks down at scale, right? It kind of starts off as we've got this simple, great idea, and then we make some hires, we're developing code and processes and systems, and we get traction. But then it feels like things start to get a little bit hot and loose, and the wheels start to wobble a little bit. The bigger the business gets, the faster the sort of complexity grows and compounds. And I do think without good systems in place, it doesn't take long before that growth turns into chaos. In fact, I know, look, our audience, there's a lot of business owners in this audience, and they've had that feeling of, hey, everything's working until it's not. I guess the question would be, why does clarity disappear so fast when things start to scale?
So I'm going to say something that might not be where you thought I was going to go, but I'll be direct. This is not a technology problem. This is a people problem. So people, when you start to scale, you start to add people, you start to add ideas, you start to add a lot of talented people. People start to chase consensus, right? Everybody's got to add their point, and then the vision gets diluted. So pursuit of clarity, absolutely, that's where you should go. Pursuit of consensus is impossible. But that's actually why you need systems like LearningZen and good communication, because what ends up happening is you lose the consensus of a small group, and then you don't have the clarity that's needed by the way you communicate with your not only with your people but your customers and everything else. And then that's where things get bogged down, because then you've got people with alternative agendas going different ways. All think they're doing the right thing, but because you don't have operational clarity, that's really what's the root cause of that.
And I guess if you're, kind of following up on that notion of like looking for consensus from everyone, is that how, the I'll go back to kind of talking about a previous life that we lived in and worked in together, but like with some of these government projects that we worked on, we would try to start off with a relatively simple idea and start building out these software systems that were growing and growing and growing. But maybe it's because they were trying to sort of appease the consensus, which was their internal employees, their management team, their stakeholders, but then also clients and outside vendors and those kind of things. Is that how so many of those government custom software development projects start spinning out of control? Is it because of consensus, do you think?
Consensus, and unfortunately the culture. And so I think the people that work in the government are fabulous. And what happens though is the culture is such that failure punishes the individual who took the risk. So what you start to see is not only are everyone's looking for consensus because of that's kind of where they feel comfortable. They're looking for consensus because if we all fail, no one individual fails. And so you move really really slow. That's why you have 17 people on a conference call, and that's why you've got 12 different departments that have to sign off, because everybody's really scared of that. But really, unfortunately, businesses that move fast embrace failure. They fail forward, they do it fast, they learn. Because success, just like learning zen was a series of iterations, right?
Right.
We tried it, it kind of worked, we fixed it, we tried it again, it kind of worked. We really did a lot of things to get there, and it was great because we were a small team and we weren't scared of failure. But when you get into a large organization, you know it all kind of comes back to that operational clarity and the culture that you have. If your people are scared to try things or try to fail, you're going to move slow.
Yeah, it's just harder to turn a big cruise ship around, right, than it is to turn a 20-footer around. And luckily enough, we were small enough and nimble enough and comfortable wearing enough hats. We could say, okay, that first iteration we didn't, hit out of the park. Let's make some changes. And we did that, like you said, multiple times. I'm sure this is something that you see a lot of. When I feel like everyone's always talking about, building systems, but most of what gets created is a lot of bloat, a lot of dust being collected. What's the difference between starting off with this, beautiful diagram and an operational, engine? I think the difference between those things is massive. But you'd help teams kind of cross that gap from starting with the diagram to having this really viable, efficient system. Can we dig into
Yeah.
that? What are you doing when you're kind of working with people and digging in to say, hey, you know what, guys, I think there's a way that we could make this work a little bit more efficiently? Is that the type of thing that you guys are doing?
It is. So there's, I'm a kind of a business book nerd. I do
You
that for
are.
my hobby. Couple of things. There's a great book by a guy named Eric Ries called The Lean Startup, and then there is somebody who I just respect, a guy named Clayton Christensen, who wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, and they both speak to two things. So Clayton Christensen was always about cheaper, faster, simpler. So start with those, and that's really what founded LearningZen was. I'm going to take a side road here. At the time that we were working with the Federal Aviation Administration, I was a non-traditional student. I was going to school, and the world's not built for left-handed dyslexic guys who have to wear glasses. We just have it, stacked against us. And I was using these learning management systems because I was going to work I was working full time, they were just crap. They were really hard to navigate. They weren't intuitive. It was text heavy. And at the same time, the FAA was asking us, hey, what are better ways we can train pilots? And we were like, well, hey, let's build a learning management system. And we took a lot of experimentation and we built them a really kind of cool tool. And out of that, we said, what can we do with this? And we realized that for small businesses, there was no cheaper, faster, simpler. It was all these big, complex, massive systems, or uh, open source systems that were like really hard to navigate, use, maintain, had a lot of technical debt that went with them. So that's Clayton Christensen, and then Eric Ries is just really about keeping things lean and pivoting, right?
Okay.
Rather than continuing down a road and adding a lot of features and functionalities, understanding where your roadmap's going, looking at when you need to make a change, and rather than adding stuff, how about, maybe we pivot in the direction that we need to go.
Little known fact that Chris Allen is also a pilot, so he has a connection to the FAA as well. And this is kind of cool that the FAA actually is still using that first real iteration of what I would call LearningZen Lite, that you designed and helped implement out to that crew. And there's over 1 million airmen and women that are taking courses on that system every year. So kudos, nice work, man.
I Something I'm really definitely proud of.
What do you think as far as what mistakes do founders make when they try to over systematize?
So not everybody is Steve Jobs, right? A lot of us think if we build it, they will come. Like Steve Jobs had this innate ability to just kind of understand what a consumer may want, but he's a one in a million. And a lot of founders, unfortunately, they have a really good idea. And then what they do is they go heads down and they build all the features and functionality that they think the customer wants, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you kind of an analogy that helps support this. My grandfather, who was a self-made businessman and owned a large store, he said, Chris, I buy 30% of the things that I like and 70% of the things I don't like. And that 70% sells out faster than the 30%. And his point was listen to your customers, right? And so what ends up happening is a founder will get an idea, he'll go out and validate it with a few people, and then he'll go heads down. And really what it is you have to keep that validation cycle going. You really have to be involving your target audience, your market. And I will tell you one thing that founders need to do, and it's really simple, is when you ask your target market, do you like this? Would you use this? They'll say yes most of the time, right?
Yeah.
The right question is, will you pay for this, and how much will you pay? Because then all of a sudden now they're committing, now they're starting to think, oh, okay, would I actually use this?
Value comes into play then, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
correct.
Yeah. It's funny how fast that happens when you bring in, paying for something. But I think it's good to be able to kind of push back a little bit and let them think through, that functionality of what they're requesting and say, do I really need this? Is it going to improve things for me? Is it going to improve things for everybody? And if so, I can put a price tag on that and I'd be willing to pay for it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
and
that's
and and
awesome.
again, that comes back to lean startup type of mentality of building out your kind of your minimum viable product, validating that going forward. Get through iterative stages of where you have something to show, something that offers value, and then iterate from there. A lot of people build battleships when all they need is a nice little ski boat.
Let's bring it back into the world of training where I think we've been a little in and out of today. But training's kind of that bridge between vision and execution, right? So systems give structure, training ends up sort of really bringing in the life. Without it, I think even the best processes don't scale if we're not leveraging our training. So if we're going to kind of connect the dots between clarity, consistency, and performance, how do we, or I guess, how do you, help companies turn abstract systems into, let's call them team wide behaviors?
Well, so it's interesting that you bring up training because I'll be honest, one of the reasons that we exist is probably the lack of really good training.
Yeah.
at our customers or at the products that we service. I think they're very, very complex. And so what ends up happening is there's not a real structured program, but there should be. Because remember, we talked about consensus and clarity. One of the paths towards clarity is having everybody understand what your product, what your systems, and what your tools do. And if everybody's on that page, that's one piece of the clarity puzzle. And then understanding, in training just isn't, hey, how to work the fryer without burning yourself. It's also, what's our company's values? What's our mission statement? Where are we going? That kind of training is just important as operational training to get you to that clarity that you need. And then it comes into, the efficiency. You want people to work better, perform better, then they need to understand what their role is. And too often roles are passed down, by word of mouth, by training, by a bulleted spreadsheet, by a document that's 3 years too old. One of the things that's nice about systems like LearningZen, is that they're living tools. You can update them, as your organization changes, and they're easy to update. And so that's kind of key.
Yeah, and that wasn't always the case, right? Like I think you and I both were using learning management systems 20 years ago where like if you didn't have a master's degree in instructional design, you probably couldn't update your training materials. At
No,
least from the e-learning perspective, right? Different if you're delivering in person or creating a SOP or something like that.
one of the most valuable things that a company can do is you don't have to replace in-person training with
Yeah.
something like LearningZen. In fact, LearningZen becomes a really powerful augmentation because most people can only do in-person training, most companies annually. If they're lucky, maybe they can do it quarterly.
Yeah.
So what about all those people you onboard in between? What about all those people who, were shopping, Prime Day, during your training? You
Right.
having a tool, a leave behind that validates everything they learned in the training, and it's actually something they can go back and look at and they can use, is incredibly powerful.
I think that notion, right, that it's always on, it's always available. And when you started talking a little bit about, the notion that a learning management system is sort of has the ability to be evergreen, right? Like it's got material that's always available to you. I love that, and I guess I'm started to consider some ways that people might use an online training system in a non-traditional factor. And I keep coming back to we're entirely focused in the franchising space now, and there's an interesting opportunity, and I feel like where training could actually lend itself to kind of help a little bit with marketing and sales. And we always think of this as, I mean, most people think of training as an expense. It's really an investment. But now we think about the fact how it might be able to help with marketing and sales because I keep thinking, look, I've looked into franchise businesses and franchise brands even before I started working in franchising. But how cool would it be for a franchise candidate, who's considering, buying into your concept or, hopefully being awarded a franchise if they were to kind of take an online course beforehand where they learned about the history of your company and what is the culture like and is can I hear from another peer like a franchisee who might have gone through what I went through and how cool would it be to just give them a really simple but slick nice overview course that they could take in maybe a 3 to 5 minute course and at the end they see, oh wow, I really feel like I, retain that information about the owner. I also feel like I got a little pat on the back when the confetti went off after my completion. And not
Sure.
only that, I can also feel like, gosh, if they've got this for me, then they obviously have training set up for, a future franchisee that's gonna come on board that hopefully they can leverage to train their own staff when they become a franchisee. So I'm realizing, even as you and I are just discussing this, that there's obviously training when someone gets hired, but I think we can even start to use training as like a sales and marketing tool. And what do you think?
Well, you definitely can, and in fact, I might take it a little bit further. That maybe then you or a franchisee would want to go, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the biggest challenges with the franchise model is verifying and kind of vetting the people who want to be part of your franchise.
Yeah.
And you could very easily take some of that, because it's the same thing. Learn some information, gather some information, see if this person's the right fit. You could very easily put together a vetting package that was hosted in an LMS that, that it was kind of an artificial hurdle, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
see if they get through this, before we start spending time going down that road with them. So, I mean, it could save costs and provide really valuable and needed information.
Right. Just see what's the level of commitment. If that, I mean, look, we're not going to expect them to read the entire operations manual, right? Like there's every franchise brand has an operational manual, and I bet you 2% of franchisees read it from cover to cover. It's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. But could we do it in a way that's a little bit more engaging to find out their commitment level?
Right.
I think for sure. And so, yeah, I definitely love the notion of that.
Like, for example, here's what it takes to be a successful franchisee. Yeah. Here's what it takes. Here's the level of commitment that you'd have to give. Just kind of that like introduction not only to the brand, but level setting so that when they're having those first conversations, they're not having to, find out that the person doesn't have the necessary funds or
Yeah.
drive, or, they haven't done their homework on their location, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think if you're doing that, you're really setting expectations a little bit as well. And this is where I differ a little bit from the marketing side of things. I think from marketing side of things, they're trying to sell something, easy, bright, shiny, simple. The reality would come in the training when we say, hey, potential franchisee, you're not just going to start printing money. That doesn't happen for a couple of years. Like your life is you're going to go through some hell for a couple of years. I feel like you're going to work really, really hard. That whole notion, I think that people have that, oh man, I'm going to, buy a Taco Bell franchise because I want to like make extra money while I retire. Well, that's not an absentee owner, franchise that you're buying into. That needs a dedicated, leader, right? A manager that can lead people, inspire people, and get the most out of these hourly employees and show them that, hey, you are appreciated. We need you. And I think training is a way that they can actually help the employees realize that you've invested in them. But I do think if we spun it away from marketing and made it more about training, we probably would be opening the kimono a little bit.
For sure, for sure. There are so many different applications to a learning management system, because you call it learning management, but it's really an information repository that you can validate that somebody actually paid attention, you know?
Yeah. And I think that that's in our world, that's kind of everything when it comes to following brand standards, right? With franchising, like if you've got to have that same experience at every, location that you go to. So there's
Yeah.
the product has to be the same. The service has to be the same. The customer experience all has to be the same. So
I mean, how many of us have gone to, like, I live in a small town just outside of Salt Lake, and we get a new franchise every, I don't know, every year, two or three open up, and we get
okay.
really excited because it's a small town, so like the whole town goes,
Right.
and the quality, everything is on par with what I see in Salt Lake, right? It's good stuff, but 3 or 4 months after the crowds have died down, all of a sudden those franchises are not the same. The
Yeah.
food I'm getting there is not the same that I'm getting at the ones in Salt Lake. There is obviously a training gap because they're not maintaining the same level of quality. There's maybe it's also an oversight gap, but that's not unusual. And those big brands that everybody knows and loves, I'm not going to name them. What do? They maintain consistent quality and experience, not only across the United States, but across the globe. And how do
Yeah.
they do that? Extensive training and extensive practices and policies.
So you said something there that triggered for me. I know you travel a lot for your work, especially with the consulting that you do for different aviation groups. Are you a fast food guy, but like when you're in, let's say you're in Asia, right? Do you ever try the McDonald's there, or the Burger King there, and does it taste the same?
So, first of all, I love fast food.
Yeah, me too.
At my age, the only reason I exercise is for it was like, how many calories does this allow me to eat?
Right.
That's the whole time I'm on that treadmill, I'm watching that calorie count going, I'm almost at a slice of pizza. So there is nothing better, and I'm just going to be really transparent and honest. And a lot of the travel nomads and these people who are travel snobs are gonna like maybe not a, actually, you want to know what, they do this, they absolutely do this. If I've been in Asia, and let me tell you, sometimes I've had a week of eating weird food, and like, I'm not a seafood person. Seafood's everywhere. So look, when I see the McDonald's, or I see a Burger King or a TGI Fridays, places that I probably wouldn't go in the United States, I
Yeah.
will absolutely go overseas, and I will stay and I will absorb it because why? I know what the food's going to taste like. I know what the brand experience is. And yes, it does usually taste the same. Now they all have their quirks. The Big Mac, the filet o fish, it's the same. The fries are always the same.
I'm going to bring us back to a more serious question, which is, and you might have to think about it for a little bit, but could you share an example where training drove measurable improvement or alignment somewhere in your life?
Somewhere in my life makes me want to turn it more personal. Whereas, if you're looking for a career perspective, so you know, for me, as someone who struggled as a traditional student, training and learning has been like kind of core to everything that I've done. It's any tool that I come into an organization and deploy, and they think, "Wow, that guy's a genius." It's because I pulled it out of training, and I've leveraged that. As far as with um, customers, so training is actually one of the core functions that we do, and there's measurable improvement. So we have a training that is built around a tool that the whole concept is, by fine tuning it, you can find the right price for the products you're selling it. It's a mixture of machine learning, it's kind of bordering on AI, but it's really complex to
Yeah.
learn. And we have a great guy on our staff who goes out and trains and helps those teams take it to the next level. And that has measurable impact because it will increase the amount of revenue that they actually get on that project. And it's only through that training, by going from kind of a basic understanding to a more in-depth understanding of how the algorithms work, how to run tests and things like that, that they get that exit. And I'm not talking about, tens of dollars. We're talking about thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I think that's a I think that's a really good example. At Venn Spring, we're always talking about, helping people improve systems and processes and those kind of things. What is one myth about systems that you would want to debunk?
I don't know. There's a lot. The first thing that comes to my mind is the bigger the organization, not the more sophisticated. Usually, the bigger the organization, the more fragile the system is. They've usually got some Frankenstein's monster of all kinds of systems, and some that they don't want to touch because the guy who was responsible for it was retired 10 years ago. I also think that probably something that there's two things that I'm now going to take you on a left turn. I think people overestimate the capabilities of their systems and still the need for human guidance and mentoring and oversight. And then one of the things that ties into this, but it's a little bit of a curveball. Large organizations, what the system is supposed to do is typically driven by marketing. What the system can do is usually IT that has to deliver it. What the system can do is not what marketing wants it to do. And those two groups do not jive. They do not talk to each other. They do not interface. So a lot of times at Venn Spring, our goal is we just speak to both groups and we try to bridge that gap and try to find the common ground between what the system's capable of. Because a lot of times the system might even be capable of what marketing wants it to do, and it will tip over in about 10 minutes of doing it, right? I mean, there's just a lot of dialogue that has to happen between those two groups. So one of our skill sets is our ability to speak to really deep subject matter domain knowledge, understanding how systems work, but translate that into um, understanding what the costs, the revenue implications, the impact of customers, and be able to speak the marketing language as well, and also the operations and the commercial teams, which a lot of times we're translators between the different groups. You know, if you're a fan of the movie Office Space, there's the I what do I do? I take the requirements from the developers and I deliver it to the customers. I have people skills. That role is actually really, really important in
Right.
organizations.
Yeah, it's because they're like they both sort of have their own constituents, right? Like marketing is sort of advocating for the client, but they're also advocating a little bit for the sales team because new features help them sell. And then over there on the IT and development side, they're advocating for the actual system itself
Yep.
and the stability of it, and is it on the newest technology and that kind of thing. So that middle role of being able to get both of those sides to kind of see what the other side is talking about and get them to kind of work together harmoniously is really hard.
And I'm going to bring up full circle. Remember we talked about chasing consensus and clarity.
Yeah.
Operational clarity, where marketing is on the same side as IT, and they're all working towards the same set of goals that were set by the executive team. That's when you're firing all cylinders. And really, unfortunately, the larger the organization that you are, the more siloed you become, the more you need consultants to come in and do what you really should be doing at an executive level. And look, our customers pay us so they can sometimes make mistakes. So they we're risk mitigation, right?
Yeah.
And we're good value for that, for what we do. But if I for my customers, to the executive teams, when you're trying to speak kind of truth to power, most organizational problems land at the feet of the executive team.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I think I love the fact that we've come full circle with this today in our conversation as well. Do you find that your role from the consulting role that you wear, when you're wearing your consulting hat, is there sort of an appreciation when you can break something down and simplify it and speak openly and honestly about it and not having to put like a marketing spin on that? Is that, I feel like this is a real value for any sort of consultant when they have that type of skill. And I know you have that kind of skill. Is that something that everybody, is that one of the reasons why they love working with you so much?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons. Here's my superpower is I ask stupid questions and I ask why a lot. And I'll be honest with you, usually when I ask a stupid question, I actually know the answer,
Yeah.
but I'm asking it for other people in the room who don't. But I'm also asking it so that somebody will explain it to me like I'm five, right? Because
Yeah.
then all of a sudden everybody can start to understand, okay, what's going on. And I find that if you ask why 3 to 4 times, you then get to the root, and you will be amazed at how many times the answer is actually, well, because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
You know, we can't actually explain what the revenue gain is, the cost gain is, what risk we're mitigating. It's just business as usual. And that's where we make change. That comes back to that, you know, if you can get to the root of the what's causing the need and you can simplify it and speak to it in a way that everybody understands and then come up with a solution that is again plain spoken in every way, language that everybody understands, then the marketing team and the IT team can work together to operationalize what that is. But when you're in the fight, when you're not the consultant, you're way too much in your own head, right?
Yeah.
When you get a guy like me who comes in, is not afraid to ask dumb questions, not afraid to push you, and not afraid to call you out, you
Yeah.
know, um, that's where the value is. It's not that I mean those people are smart people,
Yeah.
but you sometimes need a bad cop or a useful idiot.
Look, I've been lucky enough to sit in on strategy sessions that you've led, and every single session you've led, you've started with that same mantra that you just kind of talked about, which is, hey, I'm going to start with a silly question or a stupid question, right? And I know why you're doing it, and you often know the answer to it, but I think it has another effect that you maybe are not taking credit for, which is it helps everyone else in the room not feel embarrassed to ask their own stupid questions. And I think that that's massive.
Well, and it comes back to again what we're talking about is fear of failure is huge. So if you're the first to fail in the room, then other people will do it. There is, if I were to give, and it's an old book, but if for all your business owners, your franchise owners, I would have them and their teams read The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It's an amazing book about how you can get operational clarity, get everybody together, get them asking stupid questions, get them to admit their weaknesses, because then, it starts to talk about how to address that organizational culture. And then you can start breaking down the silos.
I feel like we could have a whole separate podcast on just what Chris is reading. Right? Like there's so many business books. The reason why I've read so many business books is because of Chris. This is
Yeah.
entirely like that's why I've read that book. So, yeah, you have this incredible
The,
ability to process information at a rapid pace. It's impressive.
the attendees for that will be my mother, and she'll have the volume turned down while she's making a grilled cheese.
All right. So, Chris, this has been amazing. For the listeners that want to bring this kind of clarity into their business, what's the best way to connect with you or explore working with VenSpring?
So, Venn Spring is very interested. If you go to our site, you'll see that, we do target travel and transportation, but that's actually not our strength. Our strength is bringing kind of clarity to chaos and helping people come up with roadmaps to get from where they are now to where they want to be, and that includes doing gap analysis and helping them come up with a plan. And our benefit, why we're different than a McKinsey or a Bain, is that we actually stay embedded with the customer throughout that process until they deliver. So we don't just drop off a document and say, there you go, and then split. We make sure that whatever we've pitched is implemented. So our site's at vennspring.com. You can just email us at hello@vennspring. Vennspring is spelled VNNSPRING. If you
Perfect.
drop out an N, you'll still find us because, we know people can't spell, yeah, for example. And by the way, Venn is from a Venn diagram. Spring is, from knowledge that springs from a well.
Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for talking about things that we often don't get to dive that deep into, which are systems and structure. And then we got to dabble a little bit in training. We got to circle around the franchising world as well. So just remember, if you want to learn more, go to venspring.com.
I'll tell you, maybe one of the best ways is just hit me up on LinkedIn. It's
Yeah.
Topher Allen, TOPHERALLEN. I'm pretty easy to find.
Well, look, if you got some value from this episode, don't forget to subscribe to The Training Effect, leave us a review, and share it with somebody that you know. Thanks so much. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.